This is Scott Richmond.
And Arnie Sherman.
You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 98.3 FM. Arnie, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you, Scott?
I'm great, thank you.
Last week we started off the new year with Chris Jensen from the airport.
Wonderful guest.
This week we're going to focus on this growing nucleus of technology firms that are, sort of fertilizing Missoula as a real new hub for technology.
Right.
You know, we have groups like ATG that has over 130 employees, 100 of them out of the University of Montana. That's growing like crazy. I just noticed they put an ad up saying they're going through an aggressive expansion campaign and looking for employees. We have Submittables. Mike Fitzgerald is doing terrific. We have Michelle Huey running Vim and Vigor. We have Ryan Hansen here who has Luminad. There are a number of companies, and the newest one to add to the group is an Israeli company that looked at, I think, 17 locations in the United States to open their first U.S. office, and they decided to do it in Missoula, Montana. Forecast, the number 4, CAST. And they lured away Jenny Graff from the Missoula Economic Partnership to be their first U.S. employee. And I've asked her to join us today because she has just been to Israel for the first time in the last month or so, visiting with at the corporate headquarters. And she's, I think, recruiting new staff. And they just received a very prestigious grant from an Israeli foundation, the Bird Foundation, that pairs Israeli and U.S. companies together. They only did, I think, 7 awards this year. One of them came to Forecast in Missoula, Montana. So,
wonderful.
So we're really, I'm impressed with what's happened, in a university town.
Right.
And, for a long time, Bozeman sort of had all the action in technology, but quietly and methodically, we've moved into strong contention with this core group of companies that in many ways have, sort of germinated out of the University of Montana and the technology offshoots that the university has spurred.
Sure. And, Israel is, like, in terms of leading in technology and just kind of being cutting edge, I mean, I know you have a lot of knowledge of that and experience with that. And talk a little bit about that. Because
well, Israel is, per capita, probably the second-ranked country in investment capital and venture capital.
Amazing.
The Israeli technology scene is probably second only to U.S., well, maybe China, U.S., Israel, in terms of all the technological. I mean, and there's things about Israel that most people wouldn't imagine. It's in the middle of the desert, yet it's the number one grower of cherry tomatoes.
Sure.
They do them in greenhouses, and they do them on spirals up to the ceiling. So there's a lot of interesting things that are going on there, and we'll talk to Jenny about all of that.
All right, Arnie, looking forward to it. Our guest will be Jenny Graff. We will be back after these words. All right, we are back with Jenny Graff, Director of Product with Forecast.
Jenny from the block, as we call her, the Missoula block.
It's a small block.
So, Jenny, for our listeners, what is Forecast?
Forecast is a software company, and we build out solutions with predictive analytics for the government and public safety sectors.
And this company is an Israeli company,
mm-hmm.
and had been, I think, an offshoot of another company. They spun off, right?
Yes.
And they looked at how many locations in the United States before they decided on little old Missoula to launch their U.S. operation?
They spoke with 19 states before they decided on Montana.
And what made them pick Montana, besides the fact that you were working at Missoula Economic Partnership,
right,
and made them an offer they couldn't refuse? But
everybody here's on witness protection.
Yeah.
I would love for that to be the case, but I had absolutely nothing to do with it, actually. They went to the Select USA conference,
right,
which is put on by the U.S. Department of Commerce, right, and they really enjoyed and got along well with the Montana delegation. They were able to answer a lot of their questions.
And I know the World Trade Center was in the part of that delegation.
Absolutely.
Regina Freer,
Yes.
interacted with them. And then there was a trade mission to Israel that was organized from here. And you just went to Israel.
Yes.
For the first time.
Absolutely.
And how long were you there?
We were there for 10 days.
And what did you think? What was your first impression? I like to talk to people who, get their first impression of this jewel of the desert, so to speak. Did you fly in during the daytime?
Yes.
So you saw desert, and all of a sudden this green, beautiful sort of like emerald city in the middle of the desert, right?
Yeah.
So what'd you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, to your point, the approach where you're flying over the Mediterranean and all of a sudden this green island just pops out of nowhere and you're circling over Tel Aviv. It really is pretty impressive just to fly in. I think the first 24 hours I was there, I was super jet lagged and then completely overwhelmed by how am I going to learn Hebrew in 24 hours?
Right. Yeah. Well, I can tell you can't learn it in 24 hours. You might not be able to learn it in 24 months.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to take a lifetime. But, I think as I settled in and got used to the food and the language and recognized that everyone there spoke English, it was really easy to get around.
There's only 7 or 8 million of them, so it's hard to learn. And in the rest of the world, there are only 8 million more. I mean, there's only 16 million people of Jewish faith in the world, and so they have to learn English. One of my reactions, first time there was, you hear about the Palestinians and the conflict and the war, and you're thinking about whether you feel safe or protected, or how primitive is this place. And my reaction was, this is a pretty cool place.
Yeah,
and you don't feel what you think you might be feeling from what you've heard on the news, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't feel unsafe anywhere. I mean, there is certainly a IDF presence. We were in Jerusalem on Friday afternoon, which is, if there's going to be a conflict in the old city of Jerusalem, it'll be on Friday.
Right.
So you see kind of a little bit of the presence, but it's really nothing to be concerned about. And I do take a lot of comfort in the fact that everyone there has done some military service. So I feel like they're very well trained.
One of the things that really made me kind of feel inferior over there, as you just pointed out, everybody serves in the military. And so everybody of a certain age is like in the best fighting shape that you can imagine. I was over there with one of our previous guests, Eric Stern, and we went into a nightclub. It was like everybody, it looked like it was a physical fitness instructors convention. and he and I both kind of slinked out of the place because we were just so out of shape compared to everybody else. Did you get that kind of sense in terms of young people there, or not?
I didn't notice that. I didn't pick up on that, but I don't. It's because you didn't warn me beforehand.
No, I think there is that sense. But what about so you met with the company, and so what about the technology and the business infrastructure? How does that compare to what you're used to seeing here in the States?
Well, I was pretty insulated when I was there, just in working directly with Forecast and the Milan team and doing the training. And so I don't think I got a really expansive view of what's happening with the technology over there. We were involved in a cybersecurity and homeland security trade conference there in Tel Aviv. And, that was international. There were companies from all over, but certainly, what is iterated very commonly is that, Israel is certainly leading cybersecurity, homeland security initiatives worldwide.
Right, and this company and the company it spun off from did do a lot of work with the Israeli Defense Forces. Right?
That's right.
So what are you going to focus on here? What's the plan? Are you going to be hiring more people? How many people are going to be hired? And you got this bird grant, and you might want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
What is the unrolling of this and unfurling of this company in Missoula mean?
Sure. So we are publicly owned by the Milan team, and so we are well funded, I will say that, but that doesn't mean that we're going to just grow, we're going to explode. We are growing very organically and only in line with as we win contracts. So because we come out of the Israeli Defense Force, we've built out technologies for the IDF. That's where our focus is going to be in the U.S. We're going to be working on pursuing federal, state, and municipal contracts for public safety, for homeland security, and for incident management, incident response. We'll also work on building out the solution for pipeline safety. That's the recipient of the BIRD grant. So that's going to be a 2-year research and development project in conjunction with Adelos, which is the local company.
So Adelos has, as I understand it, has fiber optic capability related to the pipeline technology.
Yeah.
And then you have predictive software that can talk about where there's stress in the lines and et cetera that might lead to leaks and...
Yeah. So the way that I would put it is Adelos is providing the hardware. So they have the hardware fiber optic cable technology that can detect acoustically if there's any kind of inconsistencies.
Right.
And so our software is where we're going to be building out kind of predictive analytics, and we're going to build out the algorithms that actually make that software or that hardware actionable, if you will. So it will be able to detect and then make meaning out of any kind of anomalies.
And the software, the proprietary software that Forecast has, can do other kind of disaster and calamity prediction?
Well, so we use a lot of models. So we have AI models for any kind of geopredictive event. So we build in models for, rate of wildfire spread, for crowd response. So anything that you would need to build out kind of a comprehensive model for incident response and targeting kind of a public safety event, that's what we do.
So will you promise to call Scott and I when Yellowstone Park explodes so we can get in our cars and start moving quick?
Give us a heads up.
Just a little heads up. Just a little red. If my phone starts flashing red, then maybe I'll know to get the heck out of here.
That is a great idea. Yeah, we don't have a red telephone yet. But maybe we should incorporate that.
The bat phone.
Right.
So I'm really fascinated. How did the company resist the temptation of like opening an office in the Washington, inside the Beltway?
Right.
I mean, that would be the initial thought if you're going to work with FEMA, if you're going to work with other federal agencies that are the FAA, other groups that are they're based there. So what dissuaded them from doing that?
I think what they really appreciated about the Montana delegation is the fact that, the Montana delegation got it. They connected them to kind of peer companies that were making it work in Missoula, Montana, which inherently, we don't like to talk about the fact that it's probably less expensive to have an employee here than it would be in the Beltway or on the East Coast. But at the end of the day, that's certainly something that probably factored in. Right. But also, a lot of government contracting is relationship-based. Right. And because Montana is certainly relationship-based, a lot of the way that we do business is by accessing government officials, and we have incredible access to our government officials.
Let's talk.
Talk a little bit about what it's like to work with an Israeli company.
I keep looking for where are we going to have these cultural nuances? Where are we going to have these misunderstandings where we're not quite communicating, where there's kind of just this gap in translation, essentially. And to be honest, it happens way less frequently than I ever expected. The working with Israelis, they understand our culture probably just as well as somebody from Wisconsin.
Well,
would,
they study. If you're going to go work in China. Mm-hmm. You study
China.
China.
No, that's how Trump would say it.
Yeah.
China.
Yeah. You study Chinese culture. You learn about you don't give anybody a gift wrapped in white wrapping paper because white is a symbol of death.
Right.
You learn all these things over the years. I've been
cultural
traveling there since 1991. And when Israelis come to the United States, they do the same thing. There are courses in how you do business with the United States and how you work with American business people.
Right.
And of course, there are courses about dealing with Israelis. Israelis historically, I can say this from my experience, are fairly blunt, They're assertive. They're often aggressive in their business strategy and tactics. They like to get to the bottom line quickly. You know, their relationships are important, but business is more important.
Sure.
So, I mean, you learn that as opposed to how things operate here. You're not a friend overnight.
Right.
You know, and, you know, we think people are. As soon as you meet somebody and spend a few hours with them, you're your friend. Israelis don't consider Americans they know for a few hours their friend. So, and I'm sure in selecting you, you know, they got to work with you a little bit because you were with the economic partnership, and they got to see your style and demeanor and, you know, your skills and your aplomb of what you're doing. And they said, you know, they didn't make that decision overnight. They had a chance to see you in action.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, I've heard all of those kind of implications as well that, you know, Israelis are very direct and blunt and confrontational. And, you know, I think that there is a bit of that, but I honestly wouldn't say that I see it any more working with Forecast, with the Israeli team, than I have in other organizations that I've worked with. The biggest change really is the work week, the fact that they don't work on Fridays and that they go back to work on Sundays. You know,
right,
it's like,
that's a difference.
I don't know how to talk about Monday for them. Like, do they get a case of the Sundays? Like, that feels weird to me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. They don't have the Sunday night Willies.
Exactly.
Thursday night Willies.
You're part of now what's called the mishpucha. You're part of the family, and they're not going to be
South Dakota. They don't use that word there.
No.
Right? No.
Yeah. So you're part of the mishpucha. So they would not necessarily be that way. But keep an eye out when Israeli firm or an Israeli counterpart is in a negotiation with someone else, trying to get a deal done.
Yes.
You know, a government contract is different. You apply, you know, it's the luck of the draw, right? It's a crapshoot whether you win or you not win. But wait till you're in a negotiation, a cross-cultural negotiation with them.
Why is that?
Because some of those traits that I mentioned will come out.
Yeah, got it.
You know, when I went there and was looking at finding an agent and a distributor for a company that I was doing work for.
I remember you telling me about that.
They just, boom, right to the bottom line. You know, how fast can we get it? When can we get it? This price won't work. I need a new price. I need a better price. You want us as a partner, you're going to have to make sure it's exclusive. I mean, they knew what they wanted, and they didn't back away from much of what they said initially during the course of conversation with them.
Well, it's good for you as a partner, because
Well,
if you can work within those parameters,
you know what you're getting.
You know what you're getting, you know it would work or it won't work.
Yep.
Right.
Wow.
For us, it would be like going down to the Diamond District in New York and dealing with the Hasidim and trying to buy a diamond stone out of the store, right? This is the best diamond. Yeah, it's $2,000 and that's it. We don't break price.
That's why I avoided that when I did buy my wife's engagement ring. It's interesting. I mean, so how often have you been back and forth? Like, what's the...
Just once, and honestly, I think they're going to be traveling to us a lot more. We'll probably be meeting in the Beltway. We'll meet in the middle, essentially.
Sure.
And probably spend a lot of time on the East Coast. This spring is how we're gearing up.
Well, that should be nice.
Yeah.
And do you think at some point in the future there'll be more than a Missoula office in the United States, or you want to just have a...
No, we've always looked at actually potentially having an office in the D.C. area. And the Missoula office was always seen as kind of this gateway to the West Coast. And then we think we'll probably need another office somewhere in the Midwest.
Yeah, so maybe 3, right?
Yeah,
and
3,
East Coast
4.
doesn't necessarily even have to be in the D.C. area, although you're going to have Amazon there and more tech companies. You could be up in the Boston area, for example, which has a big technology corridor.
That's right.
You know, so there are 2 or 3 or even 4 places on the East Coast where that would make sense. In the Midwest, you know, you would look at places like Chicago, you know, and I mean, there are 2 or 3 places there as well.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's interesting. The thing that's interesting about Israel to me is saying this to Arnie at our intro, is just how much they've done with respect to development and how they've started the firsts of everything. And if people think back in 1948, they were literally able to create a sustainable, you know, community and vibrant economy in the desert.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's not proof of concept of ingenuity and innovation, I don't know what is.
So when the team from Israel visited here, what was their impressions of Missoula, Montana? I mean,
It was cold. We tried to freeze them out here.
yeah. Even in the summer, it's cold compared to Israel. But,
well, their first trip here was in early December, like December 3rd. And, it was dark.
a year ago or 2 years ago?
It was a year ago.
So this all happened in 1 year. This is pretty fast.
Yeah, it truly is happening pretty quickly. And they visited Billings, Missoula, and Bozeman all in one day. And so you think about that travel in December. Like it was, they were definitely
Did you drive?
risking them. Luckily, I was not involved in the drive. I got to just stay.
But they
in Missoula.
drove. They saw a lot of Montana then.
The Governor's Office of Economic Development hosted them and did the driving.
Good. But I mean, they spent 10 hours driving around the state.
Well, and they learned, how there are desolate areas in Montana and, how it's a long ways in between cities here.
Well, there's desolate areas in the desert in Israel and around Israel.
Mm-hmm.
They're used to that. We just have nice, pretty trees and rivers and stuff running through it all.
That's why they come to visit.
Mm-hmm.
The country's different. As you pointed out earlier, you have federal contracts, you have state contracts, you have in some places city contract agreements. There are certain parts of the country where, for example, we teased a little bit about Yellowstone, but certainly the West Coast, you probably saw the 60-minute segment about, sooner or later, the coastline's going to start where I-5 is,
right,
running down the West Coast, and they're concerned.
We really will be the gateway to the Pacific.
They really are concerned about incident management and how to deal with things when it happens and how to alert people and how to notify. And so there's certain places you wouldn't have that same level of concern in Iowa, for example, although they're concerned about predicting weather because you want, hurricanes, tornadoes, those sorts of things.
Let's do a quick ID.
Sure.
Our guest is Jenny Graff, Director of Product with
Forecast.
With a 4. What's your website address?
Ooh, it's challenging. It is forecast-solutions.com.
So that's why people Google.
That's, yes.
Well, no, it's not that. It's the number 4, CAST-solutions.com.
Yeah. Perfect.
So what kind of people will you be looking for to bring on board? I mean, you're going to get up to 100 people, let's say, over 3, 4, or 5 years. What kind of people are going to come work for this company?
So we're a software company, but a lot of the work that we do is custom builds and we work as consultants. So we will be looking for kind of a 1-to-1 ratio of consultants to developer, more technical people.
And how many people are in the forecast operation in Israel?
Right now in Israel, just working for Forecast, we have about 75 employees.
Right, and I know the parent company they spun off for is much larger. It's a much larger company.
We're a subsidiary of the Malam team. They have about 3,000 employees.
Which is a lot for a country of 7 million people.
Yeah,
it's a big company.
Yeah, it's the largest IT service company in Israel.
Wow. That says a lot.
Yeah.
That does say a lot. With respect to doing work with Israel, and we know the cultural differences, sometimes the nuances there. When they come here, what are the things that they want to do? What is the thing that they want to experience when they come to Missoula?
Honestly, I have yet to convince our CEO to do anything outside of work.
Really?
Yeah.
He may hear this.
When they're
what
here.
What would you like him to? What's his name?
Yeah, right? Let's get him on the phone.
Let's call him up right now.
Send him an MP3 of this.
I'll tell him. I'll be his rabbi. I'll say, hey,
but when they
all
do
work
next,
and no play.
Well,
right.
Because I think more and more we think the reason why we have people want to have companies here and why they like being here is for the experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Does your congressman support what we're doing?
Right.
Because you'll be doing a lot of government kind of work.
Yeah.
And your CEO, I'm sure, was appreciative of the fact that the federal and state policy decision makers, even the municipal ones, were so interested in helping.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, the wins that we've had so far, looking at that bird grant that we were just awarded,
right.
That doesn't happen in a vacuum. Yes, we have good technology. Yes, we have strong partnerships. But at the end of the day, we're also working hand in glove with the Governor's Office of Economic Development, with the Montana World Trade Center, with the Consul General of Israel, and with our mayor and governor. And so that's something like all of those people came together to support us and say, you know, this is something that we believe in. And wouldn't that be a cool story if it were the first grant awarded in, in Montana? And so, that story, it's playing
Israeli grants
out.
are not usually awarded in Montana.
This is the first one ever.
You made an important point. He's no longer the Consul General, but Andy David was aggressively, I think, not pursued, but we saw a potential for a partnership with Israel. We saw some things that were synergistic, and we would invite him here often. And he was based out of San Francisco. And he came here 5, 6, 7 times, which is very unusual. If you think you're based in San Francisco, you're responsible for California and all these other, regional states in that region. Yet he was able, over the course of 2, 3 years, to be here 6 or 7 times.
Yeah.
And took an interest, and I think that was also helpful to pushing us as a potential landing place for forecast. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're still working with the current Consul General.
So when you were at the MEP, because now the MEP is shifting a little bit, which is good, right? New leadership, just a fresh approach to what's going on. The theme of growth and of, growing Missoula and economic development. And, when you were there and you were looking at kind of the landscape, were you talking to your peers in other Montana cities and in other regional cities, and were they experiencing a similar type of kind of growth?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Montana, absolutely. I mean, there are
Bozeman, surely.
Sure,
but not so much as Billings, not as much, right?
Not as much, but I mean, you can point to some wins that Billings has had. Their downtown is developing really well, and so is Kalispell. So, I mean, I think that the rate of growth is different in these peer communities, certainly, but we're all rising, maybe not at the same rate, but
the Northwest region in general.
Butte just got a call center, and that's going to employ 350 people in Butte.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It really feels like, from where we're from back east, it's kind of like what North Carolina and, Research Triangle and that whole thing 30 years ago.
Well,
right?
I can't find anybody who says they love living in Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley, right.
The traffic is ridiculous.
It's too much.
The costs are exorbitant. Seattle just got the highest increase in cost of living of any place in the United States.
Yes.
Your son's living there. You probably have felt a little
bit. It's incredible. But it's also, there's so much opportunity too.
A lot of opportunity, but a lot of cost, a lot of congestion, a lot of, waiting in lines at places. I mean, things that you don't have to have when you come to
not Montana.
Missoula.
No, that's very true. And then you look at what's going on downtown here, and you look at downtown Bozeman, and then just the expansion of Bozeman into the valley. It's fascinating to be a part of that and to be witness to that. And to your point, Arnie, it's small enough to where you can have that conversation with somebody who's making a decision that's going to impact 350 people fairly easily.
Yeah.
Versus in New York or in LA or in Chicago, where you're like, how do I get to the gatekeeper? There's all these, barriers.
Yeah, I think I said this on the show before. I always had a slogan for Montana. I hated the slogan, last best place.
Well, right, you have a better one, though.
I have a better one.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, oh, yeah. I've had
Test
it for years.
on Jen.
We'll test it on you. You're an economic. I always said, Montana, big enough to grow the future.
Oh.
Yes.
Hey.
And that's what's happening.
Yeah.
In fact, these little seeds that are being planted, are
started, right?
Right. Jenny, and now a second person, in 3 years, 100 people. ATG was operating out of a basement. I mean, Tom Stereos was operating out of a basement 7 years ago with one person.
Right.
And they got 130, and they're going to take off from there. Submittable.
Luminad was on the Florence building, like 5 desks.
Yeah, now I don't know how many, but I'm saying ClassPass moves.
Yes.
I mean, instead of talking about a few dozen technology jobs, you're talking about thousands in Missoula. And that changes the nature of the community. You don't have to worry about whether, the lumber mill is going to open up again. Not that there's anything wrong with working in a lumber mill, but, these jobs are in clean industries.
Yeah, right.
And they pay well. I mean, I don't know what the average is, but I know that at one point, at ATG, the average salary was like $80,000, and that's pretty good.
That's good.
absolutely.
You know what's also interesting is that as companies come here, the people that come with those companies from other markets like it here. So I've had one friend who works for one of the big companies that you just mentioned say to me, I'm thinking of my husband and I are thinking of buying real estate here. We want to get a place that we can have so that when I come here, I don't have to stay in hotels. And I'm like, and she's like, because the predictive growth of Missoula Valley is between 10 and 20, whatever the numbers were. And I was like, does that happen everywhere? Like, I don't want to buy a place in North Carolina if I'm doing business down there, although, right?
Well, it depends on your interests. If you're not an outdoorsy person, you don't want to be here.
Even if you're not outdoorsy, here is great because
it is great. But I'm saying as an outsider,
yes,
the attraction would be I can fish, I can ski, I can hike, I can do all these things. You don't come here because we have a great shopping mall or we have big museums.
Well, we do have a good mall.
No, I mean
you're right. You're right.
Think about going to Chicago. Well, it's got great museums. It has
restaurants.
It has the Miracle Mile. It has all these Michelin-starred restaurants. That's not why you pick. I mean, it's nice to have some of those things. We do, but that's not why you pick coming here.
No, that's true. Well, and actually, good segue. Jenny Graff is our guest, director of product with Forecast. What do you do in your free time? Like, we talk all about business and where you work and who you work with. What do you enjoy doing? You're originally from South Dakota, right? Mm-hmm. Moved here in 2000.
That's right.
I know, she told us. But what do you enjoy doing in your free time?
Well, the same thing that's getting all these tech companies is the same thing that brought me out here. Yeah, I play in the mountains. So I'm a runner, I'm a skier, I'm a biker, I'm a fisher, all the things.
And you're busy 365, right? It's like skiing now, snowshoeing, cross country, running.
Yeah.
And then in the summer, once the weather breaks,
then I'm on the river.
You're on the river.
Or in the trails,
for the 3 days that it's summer.
Well, let's not be. You know what? I feel bad for our brethren down in Colorado and New Mexico, right? With global climate change.
Climate change is affecting everywhere. I mean, and you can't predict.
Right.
You can hardly predict the next day here what the weather's going to be. It's supposed to be warmer.
Next 10 minutes.
Yeah. And lots of other places. I mean, we have a playoffs. The football playoffs in places like Kansas City and we're going to have snow and ice. You wouldn't necessarily expect that during a football playoff. So I mean, it's changing, and around here it's changing, but it's still in a predictable range for the kinds of things Jenny was talking about that she likes to do, and why other people would come here. You don't come here for museums and the indoor stuff. You come for the outdoor stuff.
Would you ever leave here?
I'm okay with a month or two a year in Tel Aviv, yes.
Got it. And where else do you like to go when you're not in Tel Aviv or Montana?
I'm a big foodie, so I do travel for food.
Well, you can always hop on a plane.
We'll travel for food.
You can also hop on a plane and go to Vegas where they have
You travel for experiences and food. Let me ask you a question. Mm-hmm. What's your favorite restaurant in Missoula?
Ooh. Wherever I happen to be, honestly, I can find something on any menu.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not picky.
You don't have a favorite?
At the Oxford, you can find something.
Brains
okay, I can't say I've been to the Ox.
Mo Club.
Well, there's one thing on the menu, and I will eat it.
Milkshake and burger.
Milkshake
and burgers.
Exactly.
You like the Burn Street Bistro?
Of course. Brunch is a big deal for me. Yeah.
My client came into town, Arnie, the other day.
Yeah.
He brought his wife for their Christmas party. He goes, hey, we went to 2 places because we're big foodies. They're from Salt Lake. I said, where'd you go? Oh, it's kind of close to a trailer park. I'm like, Burn Street.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I go, what'd you think? He goes, loved it. I go, where else did you go? And he said, well, it's this place you walk in and there are these big drapes.
Scotty's.
No, it wasn't Scotty's. It was, no. Big drapes. Whatchamacallit in the Florence building.
Oh, yeah, Redbird.
Of course.
Redbird.
Yeah.
Right.
And he goes, I felt like I was in New York. I said, really?
That's not what you come here for.
No, but
at the same time, you can get good food here.
Hey, look,
it's not
Pearls
like...
and Redbird and Scotty's Table and
Plonk.
I mean, Sakatumi,
Michi.
We have plenty. We have plenty of options.
And we have a old Chicago pizza. Hey, but last question though. So when you travel for food, where do you go?
Ooh, I don't like to go to the same place twice.
LA?
But no, I've never actually been to LA. But Portland, Seattle, New York.
Those are all good food towns.
San Francisco.
Yeah, exactly. Whoever will feed me, really.
Well, it's nice to get a good picture.
I'll
of who
jog
you are.
for food.
Arnie, let's take a quick break.
Right.
And after this, we'll have our final moments with Jenny Graff, who is the Director of Product at Forecast. All righty, we are back with Jenny Graff.
So the technology that Forecast develops is really in the artificial intelligence arena. Will you tell me a little bit about what's going on in that sector? Because it looks like overnight, it's coming into people's lives, from Alexa, to a million other, permutations. Well, how does that fit into what you're doing?
The way that we're using it, and there's a million different ways, a million different applications. Everybody talks about how it's going to take over all of our jobs at the end of the day. But
I wish they would. But
we're using artificial intelligence to augment human decision making more than anything. And that's where we see its real application is almost that combination of kind of combining machine learning and data with the human decision-making abilities. So kind of soft data and hard data is where we combine things.
So tell me, just walk me through a practical application, that doesn't, divulge or interfere with the Israeli Defense Force, agreements that you have.
Doesn't get me carted off to jail.
Doesn't get you carted off to jail. Give me an application of how it would apply.
Well, so kind of our most sophisticated platform that we build out is called our DSS. It's a decision support simulator. And that's where we have geopredictive analytics, where we really, like I mentioned before, we build out algorithms and predict where wildfires are going to spread or how crowds respond to a particular incident. And then all of our platforms really at their core are kind of training platforms. And so then you can run drills accordingly based on, okay, if the wildfire is spreading this fast, then I should respond in XYZ manner. And so that's how we're using AI, is really just to kind of augment or supplement the human decision-making process and improve it.
And now that you're launching the company and looking at business opportunities, who's your competition? There's got to be somebody out there that's in the same wheelhouse as you are.
Oh, there's not an area that I've looked at as far as an industry vertical that doesn't have some sort of business intelligence or AI or software solution for that vertical. I think that where we differ is coming to it from this kind of more consulting model where we try to combine both the kind of online data and the offline data and come up with a more holistic solution or snapshot of how an organization is operating.
So you would sit down, for example, with the Montana, game wildlife folks and talk to them about what problems they're experiencing and what needs they have. And then you would customize and design a solution for them.
Yeah, so the solution that we're probably going to grow the most aggressively in Montana, or that all of our consultants eventually will work in Montana, is what we call the CRPM. It's a competence and readiness performance management platform. And essentially, that is something where we'll work with an organization, talk to them about what data are they using right now in order to get an understanding of how their operations are performing, and what's actually quantified, how are they tracking those metrics, and then we would bring in the consultants and talk about, okay, how do you make decisions right now? How are you using your intuition? How are decision makers looking at those metrics? And how do we actually move that into a software platform so that we're basically moving maybe the CEO's brain into a software so that everybody has that ability to make a decision within the organization.
Jenny, you've gotten very fluent in this technical jargon, not just jargon, but understanding of this area, which you weren't even involved with 3 months ago. What's your educational background that prepared you for this? Or didn't prepare you for
Well,
it?
I'm a two-time, I'll plug in the University of Montana. I'm a two-time graduate of UM. I have a communications degree and an MBA, and I got into data analytics, actually, in the MBA program. So that was
So this
what
is
attracted
more
me.
familiar to you than just picking it up in the last 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, that's why I was interested in moving over to Forecast to begin with, because I always really enjoyed data analytics.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Scott,
Well,
last
I didn't go to
thoughts.
school at the University of Montana.
I know that. But any last thoughts for Jenny? Or any
No,
last thoughts?
I look, I think Jenny's a success story, right? Coming from kind of the MEP side of things and seeing all the things that were going on.
UM graduate, undergraduate,
Right.
graduate.
It's good. It's a great story, and we're glad to have you because it's like there's more stories like yours every
Way more.
day.
And we're hoping to create more with all these tech companies.
Yeah.
We want people to be able to come back to Montana now.
Yeah, no,
And
I
there will be.
Yeah.
We can't produce enough graduates at the University of Montana.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we talked about ATG. 100 of their 130 employees came from UM.
right.
We're not churning out enough, and so we're going to have to lure people back, and it won't be that hard when we start laying out the full story of what's really happening here.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was great having you. It was nice to meet you again.
you.
I know I've met you before at MEP, but it's so nice to see you.
Absolutely. Well, it's a
Jenny
pleasure.
from the block,
Yeah.
from the Missoula block. Good to see you.
Thanks so much.
Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Arnie, I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to What Do You Know?
I can't wait for the next show, Scott.
I'm excited too, Arnie. If you'd like to suggest a guest, send me an email at scottrichmond@townsquaremedia.com. We'll see you next week. And thanks for listening to Newstalk KGVO,